Hello all, I hope you are doing well in these unprecedented times. Anyone playing the unprecedented drinking game, there's two for you. Welcome to the Fintech Finance Virtual Arena where we're hosting you today. Today, we're going to be having a look at one of my favorite cities, not just in Europe, in the whole world, Amsterdam. Joining me today, we have Don from Holland Fintech, who is in charge of putting on, and it's starting this Friday, putting on Amsterdam Fintech Week. Don, how are you doing? How's been locked? That is a very impressive collection of books behind you.
Well, thank you. I like to save books. I can't read actually, but it's nice to have them. You can always put them in the fireplace if you're really cool.
Really good insulation on the walls.
Indeed. No, good, Ali. Really lovely to talk to you again. It's been a while, but I'd love to see you in person and actually take part in the unprecedented drinking game. But I'm afraid we won't be able to do that quite soon.
Well, you say that not with myself, because obviously we're here in the UK, and everywhere that we go, we've got to quarantine for 2 weeks. But we're going to be talking about Amsterdam Fintech Week, and I gather this Friday there is actually a physical fintech meeting.
That's correct. Yeah. So we know that everyone's really craving to get together again. So we basically invited a small group, because of course there's a lot of limitations to physical meetings, of only 50 people. But we really wanted to invite some of our members to get together and really experience again what it's like to get together. And so the launch of the week will be happening on Friday in the downtown Amsterdam with around 50 people together. But it was quite a hassle because we of course had to deal with travel bans, corporate policy against physical meetings, and besides the fact that also of course people are still also a bit worried to actually get together because of course the coronavirus is still among us.
Absolutely, and it seems to be rising at the moment as well, which is always encouraging.
Yeah.
Well, let's back it up a few bits first. First of all, got to ask, what is Holland Fintech?
Yeah, so briefly, we started out around 6 years ago when fintech was basically becoming more popular, especially on the continent. I think the UK was a bit ahead of us with regard to popularity of fintech as a new investment class, especially from a venture capital perspective. So you saw a lot of startups coming up in the fintech space, and when we saw that happening, it really felt like this is a really important change agent for the financial industry, because these new young ones coming with innovative technologies and ideas can really push also the incumbent industry towards new innovations and hopefully for the better for the customers. And so we wanted to create a platform that really brings the whole industry together, not just focusing on helping the startups grow, but actually also trying to help incumbent players deal with digital transformation, as well as involving all the other stakeholders around. Think about technology providers, advisors, regulators, policymakers, investors, to actually encompass the whole industry, so everyone speaks the same language and can sort of explore where things are heading in a joint effort. We've been doing it now for about 6 years, and well, you can imagine that one of the things we did was a lot of events. That has been a bit troublesome since a couple of months, but we've turned everything online now, which doesn't fully cover the full offline event experience, since the networking part and having a beer is becoming a bit hard. I think we've actually been able to cope quite well to at least keep on giving everyone a learning experience, to keep track of everything that's going on worldwide with regard to fintech developments. We found some okay surrogates for actually meeting each other and connecting to new business partners.
Absolutely, because I mean, the Netherlands as a whole, and I may be wrong, I'm sure our friends at Fintech are going to correct me. If you ever get a chance, look at the Fintech website. It's a black hole of a massive global index. Mm-hmm. Am I right in thinking that the Netherlands has the highest concentration of fintech firms per capita?
I wouldn't be surprised if that would be the case. I think we've got around 650 fintech companies. Of course, the definitions kind of vary a bit, so it might be hard to really benchmark. But in general, I would say that there's really a lot going on, and quite some successful ones as well. I mean, last week again, we've got the second unicorn in the fintech space with Molly Payments, getting that status after Adyen, who actually lost it after going public, obviously. But let's say you see in any case that the payments industry is really heavily well-founded in sort of the trade mentality as well as the high level of technical skills I think that are valuable.
Absolutely. Well, looking at, I always remember physical events, the amount of times that we come to the Netherlands for, Money 2020, payments race finished obviously on the main stage there, but there's things that you overhear at physical events. There's meetings that are happening that again seem to kind of happen at random. I've also been messaging a few peers, and I even had one person say, "So, what do you miss about all of the physical events?" And they said, "I miss fancy food with fancy drinks with fancy people in fancy places." So, what is it that you think that we're almost needing? Because again, a lot of people I've spoken to have said, "Look, as soon as it's safe, I'm super excited to come back to physical events." So, what do you think it is that helps the industry in terms of the face-to-face?
So I think let's say it's on one hand it's social, right? So I think people just they feel they belong somewhere because of the people, and I think that's something that we can keep on running on our existing social framework for a while, but it's really hard to establish new contacts and new business, and sort of the natural growth of your network that just is pretty hard at this stage. So I think that's what people miss a lot. So actually, and besides that, I think also the gossip indeed of everything that's going on behind the scene, right? So we now basically get very nice marketed stories of how companies are doing, but you miss out basically what people say when they get off stage. I always would actually on all conventions. I do speak a lot at physical events. I did speak a lot at physical events as well, and I would always like the backstage part, where you would actually talk to everyone what's really going on and how they really feel about new trends and developments. You would have the most fabulous debates, which would go quite deep into politics, technological ethics, and stuff like that, which I think is just pretty hard to do that these days. So you miss actually the second layer of sort of inside information. So that's at least what I miss a lot. And I think maybe as your friend said before, having a bit of a fancy engagement is of course something also we're craving for. Life is just becoming a bit more sober.
Exactly. Well, obviously to counteract that, and there has been obviously it's going virtual, kicking off this Friday, and then all of next week. What can we expect from the online event, and what are the opportunities that this opens up in terms of? I mean, the obvious one is people who would perhaps not have been able to travel to the Netherlands if they were, say, living in Palau, can now be like, you know what? Yeah, here I am.
No, exactly. So I think I would say that this week is especially for the people that are curious in the Dutch and European ecosystem. So even from Palau. So the idea is really to see. So we try to keep it really simple. So it was, I think, a month and a half ago that it became clear that Money 2020 was not going to happen, right? Which was normally quite a substantial part of the Amsterdam Fintech Week. So we really had to sort of pull out Plan B out of the cupboard and figure out, okay, how are we going to then actually bring in more content, as we would actually have a lot of traction around Money 2020, which is not going to go ahead at this moment. So we came up with a program that we actually take a tour across different subjects that we think are important in the fintech space. So we look at financial inclusion, collaboration, innovation and policy, digital transformation, and new innovations. And so we walk across these themes to actually basically have a discussion with actors from the ecosystem and figure out, how do they see that these trends actually influence where the market is heading, what's especially important for other people to know about the Dutch ecosystem and beyond what's going on. And I think it's really nice that we can actually show a lot of actors from the ecosystem for people that want to join. So basically that's what you can expect for next week. We'll kick the day off every day at 9 CET. We'll do basically a one-on-one chat, similar like we're doing at the moment. And that's with the moderator of the panel discussion that we always have between 1 and 2 during basically lunchtime, where we will have the panel session with a nice tour of the people that are involved and going to discuss the topics as just mentioned. And what we did besides that, so we actually organized 2 portions per day. But around that, our whole network has been invited to plug in parts of events during the week. So you'll find workshops from lawyers, you'll find startup pitches, you'll find workshops on new regulations. We've got a session where the regulators are opening up for Q&A. So we've got all these kind of sessions that I think for everyone who wants to get connected to the Dutch ecosystem, it's an easy place to go. Especially now since we're also experimenting with some new software that actually allows people to do networking after the event. So I'm afraid we can't hand over the beers just yet, but at least it's much easier now to connect to the people that are participating in these events. And you could actually do one-on-one video calls to sort of fix a conversation or come to an appointment, or even get a random matchup with other people, other attendees, which I think is really, well, I think we really feel it's our obligation to experiment with that as, I mean, it's basically one of the things that a lot of people are missing at the moment, right? So the making new connections based on these events, which is just pretty hard if you're just listening in on the webinar.
Absolutely. With that in mind, I mean, looking at kind of some of the breakdowns of what's going to be talked about, I saw an incredible tweet that basically said, if fintech was a movie, who would the baddies be? And the response was, unsurprisingly, in terms of tone, then not when you look about it, the response was incumbent banks and regulators. The same regulators that created open banking and PSD2. So I kind of was a little bit like, really? How important do you think the regulator is when it actually comes to pushing forward innovation and collaboration?
I think very important at the moment. Let's say, I think what I see, at least on a European level, I see that there's a lot of worry about new entrants coming into the market that play a different game than the regulators were used to. And so, well, indeed, open banking and PSD2 has been pushed forward to open up the industry. You see actually that the parties that are walking through the door weren't the ones they were expecting. So they're kind of in limbo now, what to do about that. And sort of, but I think it's a good thing because it forces them to really rethink what regulations and rules we actually need to come up with a good level playing field that is basically provides secure and trustworthy financial services. Because I think currently we just have to, have to imagine that probably the old way of trying to accomplish that is just not good enough anymore. And I see that I think because the regulators are thinking about this very hard, and we know that they will come up with new measures that will have a severe impact on the possibilities of doing innovation, because it will really determine where are the options that you could actually start something and where will there be blocking opportunities. One of the things I think is also quite important now is that, for example, the EBA is doing research in whether the anti-money laundering rules and regulations are actually effective and efficient, which I think is also quite a good question to ask, because I think they put quite a strong burden on financial and fintech companies altogether that I think is sort of overshooting the goal to a certain extent. Right, so I really believe that we should fight money laundering, but I think it's basically a lot of paperwork that's being pushed towards financial institutions, which I think makes it really unappealing to actually start a company, or even impossible to start a new company these days, because that burden is just too high compared to all the other things that you need to do. So from that perspective, I think that there's the movement in the regulations are really going to determine a lot over the coming time, as well as probably also things like an overhaul of PSD2, right? So we've now given it a try, and now we know what to do, for example, or actually a further deep dive in GDPR, because also there you see that it's I don't think it has the effect yet that we were actually looking for, and very gradually begin to realize that dealing with data is still something else than we've did before. And yeah, so I think we've got a lot of those rules and regulations coming that will open up new opportunities. Think about the field of RegTech, for example, or platforms that enable you to do that, shared data sources, shared screening. I think we'll see a lot in that area. But at the same time, we'll probably also see that some parties that have started the business now or are in business already, they will find it very hard to continue their business because they're basically being cut off. And this could be already what you see around crypto firms, for example, that have to deal with AML regulation and find it really hard to do that in a crypto environment.
Speaking of on the some of the themes, obviously, of next week. I mean, one of the areas was financial inclusion, and tying in with the regulation. One of your sponsors at a funding circle.
Yeah.
I know some of the team there have been quite passionate, obviously tying in with some of the. In the UK, I think it was back in March when lockdown first started. A lot of people got together and created a way of analysing people's credit. It was pretty amazing. But with that in mind, when it comes to financial inclusion in Europe, what is, and particularly in the Netherlands, what is still the big gap to fill? Because compared to, say, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, I imagine that a higher percentage of people in the Netherlands have a bank account. So where is the financial inclusion to look at? Is it more around ensuring that SMEs who should be able to get credit can, and similarly those who can't? Or what are we looking at in terms of FI here?
Yeah, no. So what we're especially keen on is to explain that we take financial inclusion and financial literacy more in one go. So we think that indeed a lot of people have access to financial products. I don't think that all of them have actually the same level of access, right? So because, for example, people that don't know how to make investments, they actually don't have real access to investment products. But I think the key part is mostly that people just don't have a proper understanding of the kind of contracts they're actually entering into. So if you imagine that more than half of the people in Western Europe in general don't know how to calculate with percentages, right? So if you don't, how do you then make sense of any kind of mortgage agreement or other loans that you're entering into? And so I think that's especially, I think, what I'm mostly keen about. So it's about accessibility, but also about really understanding what you're getting yourself into. So these two things, I really believe that if you take technology and finance together, you have a really powerful combination to include a lot of people. But at the same time, we should also realize that if you move things to a more digital distribution, you also exclude people that don't feel comfortable in a digital way. Think about elderly, for example, right? So you see that there's, branches are being closed, ATMs are being taken away because cash is becoming less important. But yes, some people still rely on that, and so they might get in trouble if we don't look after, what effect these changes all have on let's say the society as a whole.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point there, and not so much now because of mobile payments, but I remember you guys in the Netherlands, you love Maestro. You absolutely love Maestro, and the amount of times you go, "Oh, my card's not working." It's a MasterCard or a Visa, and so had to withdraw cash. So it still almost feels like cash, we're trying to remove cash, but we shouldn't be doing that unless there is a very clear alternative that everyone can have access to.
Yep.
As you mentioned, financial inclusion is definitely the way to go. Financial education and literacy is definitely the way to go down that.
Yeah, so it's really important. So I think it's always, I try to always avoid, just like with regulations, I don't like exceptional things, right? So I would never be a proponent of fintech regulation or fintech policy per se, other than we have to figure out if the existing rules actually have negative effects in places where we might not see them, right? So you should always analyze whether there are unintended side effects that need to be mitigated. But that's sort of the way, rather than to go that way, that you actually have sort of a proponing policy perspective that you say, we need to, give grants to fintech companies because they're just really cool. Yeah, I just don't believe that that kind of legislation would work.
That would make some incredible legislation. We only give grants to cool companies.
Well, it might be something. At least it might be worth a try. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that obviously covers some of the topics that we expect from next week. One thing I do want to touch on, kind of the last thing, we've got to talk about venture capital because, I mean, the Netherlands is phenomenal because you have the likes of, not just the actual traditional venture capitalists, but also some of the incumbent banks. Like I know the guys at like Rabobank Ventures have been very vocal and putting forward a lot of funding. Well, how would you kind of describe, first of all, for fintech, the venture capital landscape in terms of funding?
I think it's quite mature at the moment. So you see that It took a while before a lot of business angels were getting more interested in this. So you would always be looking at, especially people from the financial industry that would be able to look at fintech a bit. But I think now there's actually quite a large population of, for example, previous entrepreneurs, successful founders that actually are pouring back money in. So you get, for example, the people from Adyen that also reinvest again in new startups, or from Booking.com or those kind of companies, which I think is really pushing forward new entrepreneurs and creating new successes. So I think that's really cool. Then if you look into a bit more later stage, more professional VC, you've got, I think, around 20 VCs that actually invest with quite a strong focus in fintech, which I think is quite a good number to have some choice. With also actually a couple of, let's say, a handful of really later stage VCs close to private equity that are actually also looking after this. And I think that that's really appealing to see that that sort of the market gets more mature, and you see actually steadily the amount of money that's being invested in fintech companies growing year after year. Although it's good to say as well that I think, let's say, a lot of the VCs tend to have a bit more conservative nature to investment rather than, for example, their US colleagues. Right? So in the US, you would basically get a bag of money. We'd say like, okay, you burn it as fast as you can, then we'll go for a next round. And here you see that there's still much more drive to actually start making money with their P&L. Which has, of course, you could say you might grow a bit slower than the ones that actually can burn all the money that they can find. At the same time, you actually might be building a much more stable business, which is a bit more resilient to ups and downs in the economy. And so from that perspective, I do believe that, for example, in the current corona situation, a lot of these companies are able to make it through with a little help, rather than that it's boom or bust, and they would be gone all of a sudden.
Do you think, I mean, compared to Silicon Valley, do you think in the Netherlands that Silicon Valley is, first of all, parodied Incredible in the HBO show, where there's even lines like,
No revenue. I'll call you back. What? If you show revenue, people will ask how much, and it will never be enough. The company that was the 100Xer, the 1000Xer becomes the 2X dog. But if you have no revenue, you can say you're pre-revenue. You're a potential pure play.
Do you think that compared to that kind of attitude, the Netherlands is much more about building up slowly, but a nice, strong, sort of stable base for companies that can be around for hundreds of years? No,
exactly. So I think also what you see is that what I always find very funny is that if people look at startups, they tend to look at the amount of venture capital raised as a success factor. But actually, there's a couple of companies out there that actually just do it completely with their own money, but therefore they're completely off the radar, right? But they're actually doing really, really well. Think about, for example, Bank, a complete neobank, completely funded by his founder. Think about Backbase. Right, also completely self-funded, but also Molly, for example, they've been around for quite a while, but only last year for the first time they raised to 25 million and now 90 million this year. But before that, it was completely self-funded. And so these were companies that from an international perspective would not be on the radar because people are just looking at the stats of venture capital. And I think it's really cool, actually, if you're able to pull it through and build a sustainable business from the ground up without actually attracting the money.
Do you think, Bunk is probably the closest example. I am a massive fan of John Lewis in the UK. And got to look it up because it's incredible, but the son of the owner, John Speedan Lewis, basically was the 100% owner of the company. He then put he took the company public, but still owned all the shares and put all the shares in a trust for all. It was weirdly legal, so that the company is 100% owned by the employees. And I love that as a concept. And I mean, Bonk is probably the only neobank I can think of that has the opportunity to do something like that, which again I think creates a lot of sustainability. But yeah, so just to kind of, what's your kind of take on the future of kind of IPO versus staying private, or even going down the John Lewis route?
Yeah, I haven't heard about the John Lewis route that often, but I think that's definitely very interesting. Of course, nowadays we have to deal with, let's say, we see that SPACs are becoming quite popular. So I think we'll probably see a lot of those in the coming years, where the special purpose acquisition vehicles are going to acquire companies or do, let's say, reverse takeovers to do listing. I think we'll see that a lot because it's just more efficient than doing an actual single IPO. But I think we'll probably also see more. I do see a lot. There's a lot of talk about employee participation, and I think people are really willing to share the proceeds of a company if things go well. So I think that in general, I think the tendency is there. I think it depends a bit on, let's say, going from legal system to legal system. In some cases, it's easier than in others to actually facilitate that. And sometimes I see that entrepreneurs are just, if you're working very hard to build business, sometimes that's something that's not getting the attention it should. But I really like the concept that you actually just share it and turn it around and say, okay, let's make everyone the owner. And you go to a bit of a cooperative structure probably than with regard to the company, which I think can be really beneficial. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very rare kind of example, but I think it's really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Don, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon. Well, first of all, where can we find out more about yourself, and where should we register for Amsterdam Fintech Week?
Yeah, so I'll keep it really simple. It's xfw.amsterdam. That's the Amsterdam Fintech Week website. And I think there you'll find that there's, I think, around 25 different events that you can register for. I think they're really relatively easygoing to register and to take part. But of course, we're more than happy to take questions. You can find me on LinkedIn, for example. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Always happy to chat and see how we can connect.
Really awesome. Well, Don, thank you so much. We're going to be virtually at the event, so we'll see you there.
Yeah, looking forward to that, Ali. And indeed also to getting a real beer with you sometime soon.
Absolutely.